Alireza Firouzja absolutely has to win this game in his match against Hikaru Nakamura. We're following this match. Hikaru Nakamura is currently up 4-2, and there are 10 decisive games in this match. That means if Firouzja loses this game, he's finished. His back is against the wall. He has the black pieces. Let's see what happens. Hikaru has white, and as I said, Firouzja has black. Hikaru begins with knight to f3, d5, e3, sort of a strange move order, but after knight f6, c4, c6, d4, we have a Slav defense, and this is known as the slow Slav, where white plays e3 early instead of playing knight to c3. It cuts down on some of the theory. It's not quite as sharp as some other Slavs, but it can get very interesting quickly. And since Firouzja has not played e6 yet to block out this bishop, he goes ahead and develops it. Plays it to f5. One of the alternatives for white here is to actually take on d5 after cd5, cd5, queen to b3, attacking the b7 pawn, queen to c7 to defend it, then bishop to d2. This is his bad bishop blocked in by the pawns, and the idea is after black plays e6, he can play bishop to b4, trading off that bishop. But instead, Hikaru plays knight to c3, probably the most natural move on the board, e6, and now knight to h4. You'll see after e6, this bishop at f5 has a limited number of available squares, so Hikaru wants to take that bishop of Firouzja's to get the two-bishop advantage. Firouzja plays the bishop to e4. Now, it would be a mistake to just take it with the knight on c3, because after de4, the knight on h4 is very low on available squares. It can survive, but only by playing uncomfortable moves. So instead, the theoretical move here is f3, kicking the bishop back, bishop to g6. So Hikaru's thinking, I can take this bishop anytime I want, so I don't have to capture it right now. He plays queen to b3. Because this bishop at g6 developed early, the b7 pawn is undefended, so the queen at b3 immediately attacks the b7 pawn, queen to c7 to defend, then cd5, and taking with the e-pawn is perfectly playable here, but Firouzja decides to take with the c-pawn instead, and one of the things that does is it does make the c6 square available for his knight. Bishop to d2, and now knight to c6, and rook to c1. We see Hikaru place his rook on the only open file on the board, opposite Firouzja's queen at c7. So bishop to e7 is played by Firouzja. Now here, Hikaru plays knight to a4, threatening to jump into c5, but the computers don't like this. They think this is too soon. They prefer the move knight takes g6, going ahead and taking that bishop now. After hg6, bishop to d3, white has a good position. It may look like this pawn on h2 is hanging, but in fact, after rook takes, queen takes b7, white is just completely winning the position. So knight to g6 was what the computer prefers, but Hikaru plays knight to a4, heading into the c5 square. And here Firouzja plays a very, very creative move. He plays the move knight to e4. And at the end of this variation, material is equal, but he's drawn Hikaru's king out into the middle of the board, a very powerful concept. These next three moves are forced. Knight takes g6, knight takes d2, king takes d2, hg6. So we see everything is fairly equal except white's king is in the middle of the board. And so let's see if Firouzja can take advantage of the fact that Hikaru's king is in the center. Hikaru plays bishop to b5, piling up on that knight on c6, and again, he's got that knight is pinned two ways. The c file is pinned against the queen, and on this a4, e8 diagonal pinned against the king. Rook to b8, the idea is that if a capture is made on c6, the b file will open up against the queen and the rook will be there. But there's also this threat again of queen takes h2 or rook takes h2, and it's a real threat now. It does have power now. So Hikaru plays f4. Now, we talked about how Firouzja has to win this game, right? He must win the game. The next few moves he plays are examples of just incredible determination. He wants to win this h2 pawn, and he's got to find creative attacking moves to make it and force it to happen. And he does so with incredible tenacity. His first move is g5. He wants to open up this diagonal for the queen at c7, aiming at the h2 square. So he plays g5 to open up that diagonal. Well, Hikaru says that's not going to work. g3, I'll just defend it with the g-pawn and you won't be able to get through. Pawn takes pawn. He takes with the g-pawn. If you take with the e-pawn, you just create a weakness on d4. That's no good. So he takes with the g-pawn, and can you see what Firouzja's next move is? That's right, the same exact move with the second pawn, g5. He is fighting like anything to open up this diagonal. So how does Hikaru deal with that? Well, rook c to f1. He defends it with the rook. Pawn takes, rook takes f4, and it looks like he has successfully blocked the queen and rook's access to this h2 pawn. But there's one more move left. Bishop to g5, hitting the rook, and there's just no easy way to deal with the threats. And after rook to f3, rook takes h2 check, and Firouzja has gotten his prize. He worked hard, and he won his prize, that h2 pawn, which he gets with check. Rook takes h2, queen takes h2, check, and the king goes to d3. So now, Firouzja has won a pawn, and he has better king placement. So what is his next strategy? Well, we talked about this pin on the knight at c6. So he decides that the safest square for his king is this g7 square. So he begins the journey. The king goes to f8. The knight finally arrives at c5. By the way, he can't take on c. It almost looks like there's a pin down this b file, but there isn't. The reason is after pawn takes bishop, this queen all the way over at h2 keeps this rook defended. So there's no pin on that file. These long moves are often not very easy to see. But after knight to c5, Hikaru does have a threat. He's threatening to take on e6 with check because Firouzja can't recapture with his f-pawn because there's a pin down the f-file. So that's a serious threat. But the king goes to g7. Now there's no longer a pin, and he has completed his journey. Hikaru's knight goes to d7, attacking this rook at b8, forcing Firouzja to respond. And he plays rook to c8, potentially gaining activity down the c-file. Bishop takes c6, rook takes c6. Well, isn't Firouzja just hanging his b-pawn? Yeah, he is. And Hikaru could have taken it. The problem, queen to c2 checkmate would follow. So I wouldn't recommend he take the b-pawn, and he does not. The knight comes back to c5, helping to keep this rook from having access down the file, but now b6, kicking the knight away so the rook can gain activity on the c-file. Instead of moving the knight, Hikaru plays queen to a4, counterattacking the rook at c6, but the rook just moves out of the way, and now the knight does have to move. Hikaru plays rook to a6, and now rook to c1 is played. And Hikaru knows that it's just about over. If you look at this position, Firouzja is threatening to play queen to g2. What that does is it completely traps this rook at f3. When the queen goes to g2, the rook has nowhere to go at all. The only place it could go would be f4, giving itself up for the bishop, but that would be a decisive material advantage, and he would end up getting mated very quickly after that anyway. So Hikaru, in this position, goes ahead and just plays rook to f7 check, king f7. Maybe he was hoping for maybe a perpetual check, but there's nothing. If he were to play queen to d7 check, Firouzja would just block with his bishop. And in a desperate situation with his back against a wall, Firouzja wins, and the match is now 4-3. Now, even after watching this great game from Alireza Firouzja, if you want to see more games from this match, be sure to check out this game right here. I think you're going to enjoy it.